My name is Catherine Landrum. I am currently a student in the Masters of Curriculum and Instruction program at CSU Sacramento. My action research is entitled Love You Today, Teach You Tomorrow, a teacher implementing trauma-informed practices. I teach fourth grade in an urban area in South Sacramento. 2 years ago, there was a high-profile shooting in the neighborhood, and one of my students asked me, why does this keep happening here? That's when it hit me that my students have experienced so much trauma. I wanted to help them deal with it. I also wanted to educate myself on the effects of trauma, which brings me to my research questions. How can teachers improve the learning environment in their classrooms with trauma-informed practices? What was my experience after implementing trauma-informed practices in my classroom? And what are the implications of trauma-informed practices for urban education? A trauma-informed practice is defined as an organizational structure and treatment framework that involves understanding, recognizing, and responding to the effects of all types of trauma. These 3 pieces of literature really helped me with my research. I'll be referring back to 2 of these later on in my presentation. I began by giving my students, the teachers, and 2 social workers at my site a survey through Qualtrics. The questions for the teacher and social worker survey focused on the effects of trauma on students and teachers as well as work experiences. The student survey focused on the 6 key principles of trauma-informed care as it relates to the classroom environment. The responses were collected anonymously. I coded and analyzed the survey responses for themes. I also did a narrative analysis of my classroom observation notes while implementing trauma-informed practices. In round 1, I looked at the responses to all 3 surveys for any themes or basically anything that stuck out. 81% of the teachers surveyed believe that there is a lack of education or training when it comes to dealing with students with trauma. One of the teachers said, nowadays we should be provided with training in many different aspects of trauma, as there are many ways to teach a child to learn. I thought that this was a very interesting point. As teachers, we are taught to differentiate depending on the student's learning needs or styles. We are not taught to deal with their different emotional needs. With the student survey, I noticed that I received very positive responses when it came to my students' trust and relationship with me. I'll get to the negative responses in round 3. In round 2, I took a deeper look at the teacher survey responses and focused on the question, how does having students with trauma affect you as a teacher? 67% of the teachers mentioned something that can be related to vicarious trauma. In the article, When Students Are Traumatized, Teachers Are Too, Emelina Monero discusses this type of secondary trauma. Sometimes called the cost of caring, vicarious trauma can result from hearing people's trauma stories and becoming witnesses to the pain, fear, and terror that trauma survivors have endured. These are some of the responses that I found relatable, especially as an urban educator. Our students statistically experience more trauma, and there can be a sense of helplessness and added stress. Preparation for round 3, I went back to the student survey. 27% of my students answered probably not or definitely not to the empowerment and choice question, do you feel like you are heard, which was the largest percentage of negative responses. The mean of 2 in 5,500 is also the highest. With this information, I decided to implement the trauma-informed practice of allowing my students to take breaks. The break involved the student either stepping outside, going to the bathroom, or walking around the building. Once they came back, I would ask if they wanted to talk now or later. This allowed the students to have a choice. It empowers them to self-regulate and be in control of their emotions, and it gives them the opportunity to express themselves. This was very successful with students who can have challenging behaviors. One day, a student thanked me for letting him take a break. He explained that he had an argument with his parents the night before and he didn't sleep well. He said he was tired and didn't mean to be disrespectful. The break allowed him to think, calm down, and to reflect on why he was behaving that way. I also learned a lot from the literature I reviewed. The neuroscience behind the detrimental side effects of trauma on the brain and how it affects behavior were eye-opening. This information would be so beneficial for teachers. Not only do we need to help our students deal with their trauma, but we also need to learn to deal with our own trauma. This should be included in teacher education. I found success with allowing my students to take breaks. I feel like my student-teacher relationships greatly improved. This shows that something small can lead to big changes. As teachers, we are taught to have our rules and procedures and apply them to all of our students, but our students are not all the same. They have different temperaments, behaviors, and emotions. We must address them on an individual level in order to fully support our students. My goal for my action research was to put a spotlight on the effects of trauma on students. I want to continue to encourage teachers to look at behavior through a different lens and implement trauma-informed practices in their classrooms. I would love to see this as an ongoing learning experience for teachers. Here are some references that I used in my research. Thank you so much for watching my presentation.